I happen to believe that for the primary level of training, the ACS really doesn't do a lot to further aviation. If anything, I believe it's going to hurt it. There's some good in everything that occurs, and the ACS does have some value. But the consequences of the ACS are going to be far more deleterious at the primary level than it would be at the more advanced levels. And that's where John and I are going to debate.
Well, actually, I have been reading up on, Rod Machado has been very vocal on his objections to the Airman certification standards. So I've been reading up to see what the complaints are, and I've been thinking a little bit about how I can address his concerns. I mean, anytime you make a big change in the way we do things that are important to us, and the practical test standards and Airman certification standards are important to anybody who is becoming a pilot or anybody that's training somebody that's becoming a pilot. They're very important. And anytime you make a big change, you're going to have people object to it. So I've been trying to understand what the objections are.
I'd like to introduce the editor-in-chief of our major sponsor, Flying Magazine, Steve Pope. Give him a big round of applause.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the highly anticipated ACS debate between John King and Rod Machado. I mentioned at the opening session this morning, they have both agreed to accept the results of this debate if they win. And really, this debate, it started this spring before the ACS went into effect. And for those of you who don't know, the Airman certification standards have replaced the practical test standards for new pilots training for the private pilot and instrument courses. And really, this was done, one of the main reasons this was done was to get rid of a lot of these confusing, outdated questions that were in these written tests that were just terrible on things about NDB and questions that required interpolations and answers that were within a few feet of each other for runway lengths, and it was really, it needed to be changed. And what has happened is everything has been overhauled. Really, it's been a very big change, and so it was actually John King, who is a columnist, as you know, for Flying Magazine, contacted me, and he said, you know, I know that Rod has his opinion about the ACS and these changes that are happening. And John obviously has his opinions. He was on the working group that helped craft these rules. He said, what would you think about us doing a dogfight style article in the magazine where I would give the pros of the ACS, Rod would give the cons of the ACS, and we could actually run this article in Flying Magazine and run the same article in AOPA Pilot. Rod is a columnist for AOPA Pilot, and AOPA does these from time to time. They do these dogfight style articles. So I contacted my friend Tom Haynes at AOPA, and he immediately said, yeah, let's do it. So we contacted Rod, and he said, let's do it. This is great. So we got Rod and John together for a photo shoot and did photos, and they each wrote their articles and sent them in, and we did the editing. It was actually a really fun process between Flying Magazine and AOPA Pilot, making sure the edits were the same. And I don't know if anything like that has ever been done between two aviation magazines, that the same article has been run in the same month in the same aviation magazine. It was a really cool thing. And I think it'd be cool if we did something like that with aviation magazines, had that you know, working together more in the future, because it was a really positive and just fun experience. It was cool. So now I'd like to call John and Rod up to the stage. Now, guys, I get to be Chris Wallace. You have to decide.
Thank you very much.
If you guys want to, buddy. You guys want to. We weren't sure that was going to happen.
I know everybody's thinking, okay, who's Hillary, who's Trump? That's what they're thinking. Don't deny it. Don't deny you're thinking that. Don't deny it. So who knows how it'll go, but...
So I think we should start. We'll get into a good debate, but I think where I'd really like to start is to have John explain to us, what did you do?
Well, that's actually a good question, Steve. The Airman certification standards did not change the skills required of a pilot. So they're how we evaluate a pilot when they become a pilot, particularly on the private instrument now, eventually on every one of them. But the idea is, what are you going to ask the pilot to be able to demonstrate? We want them to demonstrate skills, and then previously there were no standards for the knowledge. And what that really meant is meant is that they could ask anything, and did ask anything. And so they would ask tricky, trivial, obscure things. And what had happened is, as the FAA would ask tricky things, so the aviation community that was doing instruction for pilots would start preparing them for tricky things. So the FAA then would start asking trickier things, and more trivial and more obscure. So they wound up asking how many satellites are in the GPS constellation. Well, no one knows the full component. You just don't know. You just enough for it to work. So they would ask tricky, trivial, obscure things. And so eventually they were asking on ADF, they would ask if you know the bearing to the station and the relative bearing, the magnetic bearing of the station, relative bearing, what's the heading of the aircraft? Well, you can do some math and get there, but normally the way you tell the heading of the aircraft is you look at the compass. So it was just a tricky question. It was just a trivial question. And so they got into more and more of that. They wanted a bell-shaped curve, and they wanted people who knew about ADF from the people who really knew ADF. And so they wound up doing this. And meanwhile, we were traveling a circuit of cities teaching ground schools. We would come back to a city, and someone would say, hey, did you hear about Bill? No, what happened to Bill? Well, he got killed in an aircraft accident. And he got killed in an aircraft accident through some risk that he failed to manage. So we were not teaching pilots how to manage risks, but we were teaching them tricky and trivial and obscure stuff. And so that's the reason for the Airman certification standards, to have standards for knowledge, and then to be able to have an applicant know what's happening now and what's about to happen that's bad if he doesn't do something about it. And we actually weren't teaching that to pilots. So now we're asking pilots to be able to identify what's going on in the way of risks and what might happen worse if they didn't do something about it. So we're asking them to know how to manage risks. So what we did is we took the normal skills, added knowledge standards, and added risk management standards. And that's what the Airman certification standards are.
Now, Rod, since about 2013, you've been a pretty vocal critic of this change. And I'd like you just to tell the audience why that is, what your feelings are, and we can get into more specifics, but just in general, why is it that you think the ACS is not such a good idea?
You bet, Stephen. And by the way, again, thanks to you for doing this. You and John came up with this idea. I think it's a great way to kind of, find out what both sides of the issues are. And that's really neat. And one thing that's important to understand, too, John and I, we go back a long time, 20, 30 minutes? I think.
Yeah, I think 36,
35 years or so. And what's a very important thing to understand is you can like somebody, and I like John and Martha, wonderful folks, great aviation humanitarians, if you will. That doesn't mean that you agree on everything, but you can disagree with somebody and still get along with them. I mean, if I couldn't do that with my wife, well, the reason we disagree on occasion, and we still get along, mainly because I like sleeping indoors, if you understand what I'm saying.
See, I'm at a disadvantage. Rod is a professional comedian.
No, I'm not trying to work the audience here. I'm just getting prepared for
No, he would never do that.
Okay, I'm Trump. What can I say? I guess it just revealed it. No hiding it now. Folks, the fact is, and again, I have absolutely, and this is important to understand, I have absolutely no doubt that my buddy John and people on the ACS committee have the best of intentions. Not one doubt whatsoever, and do not doubt that. But I also learned a long time ago that having good intentions is a highly overrated virtue. And it's not what you feel that's important, it's what you do that counts. I don't care what you feel, the best intentions in the world, you gotta do good things. And the first thing I take exception with John is this idea that the written tests were trivial. Yeah, okay, and I'm very familiar with the written test too, of course, because I write books that hopes to prepare people for the FAA knowledge exam and basically to teach them ground school. That's my primary purpose. But when it comes to triviality, yeah, okay, granted, there are probably some trivial questions. But the interesting thing about the trivial questions is the ones that John mentioned aren't necessarily trivial. We still have ADF, NDB approaches in the national database. And sure, the FAA is getting rid of 158 of them, and there are a couple of NDB approaches here. People say, well, we don't fly NDB approaches anymore. Excuse me, we have a G1000. How many people have a G1000, G2000 equipment in their aircraft? Right, and it has an RMI pointer, a bearing indicator, correct? And the principles of ADF navigation are the same principles you use when you fly GPS, right? Track, ground track, bearing to the station, heading. Those are essential components of GPS navigation if you are not flying the magenta line. In other words, that is not your primary focus of navigation. So not all the questions we talk about on the ACS, I'm sorry, on the written exam, are trivial questions. And yeah, okay, maybe they should be replaced someday. But these questions, in essence, have been tested and tried over the years and refined in such a way that they test a person's knowledge. Now, this is the point I want to make about the test questions. And this is a big misconception about people on the ACS committee. People on the ACS committee believe that the test is intended to test to assay a comprehensive assessment of your aviation knowledge. And that is like believing, folks, that it's like believing that the Iron Age was a time when people wore neatly pressed clothing. I don't know how to express it better than that. Or it's like believing that pre-ignition is the ability to see sparks from the future. That is simply not true. The purpose of the written test is, according to the FAA psychologist and the FAA testing educational specialist, Dr. something, I don't have his name, but he wrote in a letter a statement that said that the FAA test is what they call a personnel-based test. And it's a personnel-based test for the intent of assuring a wide comprehension of knowledge. It's not testing a person's specific knowledge, but it's intended to ensure that a person studies a broad area of knowledge by asking questions on different divergent topics. Yes, the number of GPS satellites available at any one time, the number of GPS satellites in the constellation. Since you don't know what those test questions will be, the purpose was to get people to study the large area, the full comprehensive body of, let's say, the pilot handbook, the risk assessment handbook, the airplane flying handbook, rather than just studying specific parts, because that's where the questions were asked. So that's my primary problem with the written exam knowledge on that. Those questions are just fine, and yes, they should be updated as they are, and the folks at Oklahoma City that are involved in the updating of those tests, those questions are updated on a cycle of, used to be once every 2 years, but now they're updated on a cycle of every 4 years, and that's directly from the man that was involved in updating those particular test questions.
I don't know where you get that information. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, no, that is, yeah. Gary, sure, I'm actually happy to provide my source. And then also there's this bit of information that comes out of the head of the FAA and the ACS committee about two guys sitting in a room writing test questions. Well, that is a complete fabrication, because AFS 630, the company in Oklahoma City that actually creates these test questions, as of right now, there are 23 people on staff at AFX, as of 2015, excuse me, and roughly 11 of those are involved in, actually 14, excuse me, and the list is right here if you'd like to see it, are involved in, directly or indirectly, the written test preparation. So there's a lot of activity with keeping tests current and knowledge current, and I just don't buy this idea that the test questions don't do what they're intended to do.
We are live fact-checking at flyingmag.com, so. So John, what Rod is saying is the PTS wasn't broken. Why fix it? How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that I can't tell these folks why we changed the PTS, but I think they can tell me. How many people in here know someone personally? Now, I'm going to ask you this question, by the way, and if the answer is yes for you, I'd like for you to put your hand up, leave it up, and look around the room. And here's the question. How many people in here know someone personally who was killed in an aircraft? Put your hand up, leave it up, and look around the room, and it's about 3/4 of us. And that's why we are changing the PTS to the ACS. And most of those accidents, a lot of people think that those accidents happen because of a failure in skills. But what happens is a person gets themselves in over their head And no matter how good their skills are, they're going to get in over their head in their skills if they fail to manage risks. And skill failure is the result, is the ultimate result of a failure to manage risks. You get yourself in beyond the airplane's capability or your capability as a pilot. So what we would like to have people do, the first step in risk management is situational awareness. Do you know what's going on? And do you know what might happen bad if you don't do something about it? And we, believe it or not, amazingly, weren't teaching pilots the systematic habit of managing risks. There are a lot of other things we do teach pilots. We give them checklists, and we have them use checklists and so on. But I'm a big believer that if you teach someone to look both ways before they cross the street, the outcome will be better when they cross the street. And there are many similar things in aviation that we need to teach pilots. But as a community, we just haven't been habitually doing that. And do we have it down yet now? No. Is it perfect now? No. Can we improve at it? Yes. Is the ACS in the current version the final answer? No. But I do believe that if we just do a good job of teaching new pilots the habit of seeking out risk, thinking about risk, being situationally aware, and that they demonstrate that on their practical test, the odds are much better they're going to demonstrate that when they actually go out and fly the airplane. And so that's really the reason we're doing it. We're doing it because of the people you know, the people you care about, who are no longer with us. And we're doing it to protect people. And these people who die in airplanes very often are the movers and shakers in their community. They're the people who get things done. And the reason pilots come to grief in many cases is because we're goal-oriented people. When you learn to fly, you do something that takes a long period of time. You do it over an extended period of time. Your right leg shakes. You sweat all the way down to your belt and beyond. And you persist because you're a goal-oriented person. And that very goal orientation, which makes us the movers and shakers in our communities, makes us the achievers that all of us know and love, is a risk factor in an airplane. Because we tend to deny those things that prevent us, those realities that prevent us from accomplishing what we want to do. And so what we have to do is have pilots who are situationally aware when they fly, and they need to know how to be situationally aware. Now, you just can't say to a pilot, think. You have to tell them what to think about and how they think about it so that they can think about the risks associated with what they're doing and how they can mitigate those risks. So that's what it's all about. That's what's wrong with the PTS. The PTS worked very well on skills, and it worked very well for many years, and we are very, very slowly improving the fatality rate. It's better than it's ever been, and we're improving it. And I would like to think that we're improving it because we're doing a better job of teaching pilots things like this. But do I think do we have to necessarily make flying more expensive? No, we don't. I think if you teach this as you go along, as a person learns to fly, you give them scenarios and ask them to make decisions and tell them, here's the situation, what would you do about it? We can do this without increasing the cost. And we're being told right now that check rides are taking about 20 or 30 minutes longer. Is there some cost increase? Probably there is. Can examiners get better at it? Yes, I think they can. I don't think examiners have the final word on all of this. I don't think they know exactly how to do it. It's new to this aviation community. But I do think that we don't let children cross the street without looking both ways, and there are many, many risks in flying that are very subtle. We need to tell people how to identify those risks and mitigate them. It happened in scuba diving. Folks, in 1970, when Martha and I started scuba diving, the fatality rate was about 110 fatalities per 1,000,000 dives. In 1989, they had it down to 11.9 fatalities per million dives. They improved it by an order of magnitude. Why did the scuba industry improve it by an order of magnitude? They shifted their focus on teaching people skills. In the 70s, we learned to scuba dive. You had to be a He-Man and had to go the whole length of the pool underwater and all sorts of physical tests you had to do. And they started teaching identification and management of risks. And that made an order of magnitude of improvement in the fatality rate in the scuba industry, and I believe we can do it in aviation. We're on our way to doing it.
The ACS really does emphasize risk management, situational awareness. And I wanted to ask Rod, I mean, do you think that that was a change that made sense to do?
Okay, and allow me to say something before you answer that. Let me tell you exactly what I stand for, folks. I stand for and have stood for this publicly for the past 30 years. And that is, I believe that every person should have the opportunity to earn a private pilot certificate at minimum cost, a reasonable cost, with minimum government hassle and hoops to jump through. And this is becoming ever more difficult. But, and I intend to show that to you in a second, but the point is that getting a private license is now becoming far more difficult. And when you look at what actually is the actual fundamental cause of accidents, I know John says it's failure to risk manage, but the data, and I do believe the data are correct, the data do not support that point.
We interpret the same data differently, Rod.
Well, maybe you do, John, or as you say, wrong in this instance. And let me lay out the facts for you. And here are the facts. There's a wonderful study, the most comprehensive aviation study of aviation accidents. And write this down if you like. You can Google it. It's also on my website, on my blog. It's called the HFAC studies, Human Factors Analysis of General Aviation Accidents. Folks, you're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you, but it is based on all this comprehensive analysis. Again, the single most comprehensive study ever done on GA accidents. And that result said, in general aviation, 79.1% of all aviation accidents are based on skill-based errors. Now, the other 20.8% or 20.1% of the accidents involved some function of judgment, decision-making. But the interesting thing about that is roughly 80% of the, 29% of the other 20% that weren't specifically skill-based errors, that 20%, most of those were started with a skill-based error and led to a judgment error. So what does the FAA do or the ACS committee do? Again, people with great intention. They say, you know, what we've got to do is we've got to manage risk. So they involve people in creating this ACS that requires you to think what we call in aviation higher order thinking skills. You've got to start thinking as if you are an airline pilot, and thus your accident rate will go down. I have no problem with higher order thinking skills applied to, in this case...
There's nothing about high order thinking skills in the ACS.
So, actually, that's wrong. That's wrong. No, risk management is a higher order thinking skill. Gotcha. No, risk management is a higher order thinking skill, folks. That's right out of FITS, FAA industry training standards. It's defined as a higher order thinking skill. We may disagree on that, but whatever. And the point here is that the FAA has elected to take your average private pilot and instead of focusing on where they actually need to learn, the areas they need to learn in, like, oh yeah, flying the airplane, physically flying the airplane, and preventing, oh yeah, loss of control accidents. People don't lose control of their airplane primarily because they're not assessing risk properly. People are losing control of their airplane basically because they don't know how to fly the airplane the way they should be flying the airplane. So what are we doing? ACS committee comes along and says, let's see, let's do this. We have a PTS that tests flying skills. Let's add higher order thinking skills. First question I asked one ACS committee member, or I asked 5 ACS committee members at Sun and Fun, I said, what proof do you have that based on the dramatic change you're making on the PTS, to wit, John said, yeah, maybe there'll be some more increase in time. Yeah, well, trust me, folks, oral examinations now are going in excess of 4 hours. In fact, is Mark in here? Where is Mark? Mark, what did you say the amount of time was that student spent on the recent oral examination that was done under the ACS for the private pilot exam? Okay, 4-hour oral and 2-hour flight. Oral exam should not take more than about an hour and a half if the student knows his material. Diego Garcia, San Diego, California, 5-hour oral from the FAA inspector, the DPE, who is doing a test under the ACS. That will happen. But getting back to my main point, so we have these higher order thinking skills that are being applied now, and what is happening is we're making the oral examination cost take longer. That will be commensurate with an increase in price of the private pilot oral exam, which, by the way, the private pilot check rate in Southern California cost $800. All right? That's right. For a private pilot check rate, expect that to go up. So, get to my point, and the point was I asked these folks on the ACS committee, what proof do you have, based on the increase in price we're going to see for a private pilot certificate because of the ACS, what proof do you have that the ACS are asking risk management questions on the oral exam, on a private pilot exam, will actually reduce accidents? Not one bit of proof, but I can prove to you that it actually doesn't reduce aviation accidents. And the proof is 10 years of FAA FITS, F-I-T-S, FAA industry training standards, applied starting back in around 2002 all the way up through 2012, and the accident rate in general aviation aircraft, when FITS was applied, applying higher order thinking, risk management, situational awareness, and the accoutrements of what we call higher order thinking, the accident rate in some aircraft, like the Cirrus aircraft, actually went up. In other aircraft, it stayed the same for about 10 years, 12 years. That higher order thinking at the primary level has no effect on the safety of flight for primary students. What does have an effect is actually teaching people how to physically fly their airplane, and the ACS acts in contradistinction to that main objective. And that's my big beef about the ACS.
Mr. King, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Now, let me see if I got this right. You're opposed to thinking.
No, I didn't say that. I'm opposed at the primary level to focusing on the things that don't help safety, which are stick and rudder basic stick and rudder
You're a
skills.
very good debater. And what you're doing is setting up a straw man. You're misstating my argument and then tearing down the argument that you misstated.
I was not planning to do that until after the debate, John. So.
You did a fine job of it. And
Well,
so
you
we
are
don't
so
mention
kind.
higher order thinking skills, and we
Nobody
don't
said
mention
that,
fits.
and there's your straw man, my friend.
And so what we're talking, let's get this right. Do I have it? You want us to not tell people about risks?
What makes you think that teaching primary students, teaching them good basic stick and rudder skills in the normal process of teaching somebody how to fly does not teach somebody the basic skills at the level at which they're learning, thinking skills, risk assessment skills, awareness skills? That's what they're taught at the primary level. What you've done now...
Then what's your objection?
My objection is you have taken and made the private pilot exam far more complex and far more, I believe, extensive to the extent that it's going to cost more for a person to obtain a private license with no tangible benefit.
Well,
none whatsoever.
But that's not what examiners are telling us is happening.
That is, you are certainly talking to the examiners that want to tell you the story you want to hear, my friend.
Well, I think we're using numbers. So we're actually doing a study on it, and you're doing anecdotal
I've seen the effects of the ACS study, by the way, so I know how that works.
You know,
the
interesting thing about this is I actually belong on the other side of the argument because I'm anti-government. I'm not a big fan of government. And if someone is going to make things more complicated and more difficult, I'd be the first there to object to it. But the problem is that this has been the most collaborative effort that I've ever seen. First of all, you talk about these two guys in the room. The head of Airman certification standards and Airman testing is an ex-charter pilot in Alaska who flew single-engine airplanes for charter in Alaska. These are real-world people. These are not ivory tower people. And these are people who have also seen those people who came to grief in airplanes and think we can do a better job. And you act as if good intentions are bad things. But these are people who are knowledgeable. They're not ivory tower people.
So what's your point? What's your point with that, John?
My
Where
point
are you going
is,
with that?
what was your point by saying good intentions or, oh, they're just have good intentions? Well, my point is these are substantial people who know what they're doing and who are doing something that will result in safer, more capable pilots.
Okay.
And you got something against their knowing about risks when they learn to fly?
John, I'm not quite following your logic there because
I can see that.
Somebody has
it's obvious.
Somebody has good intentions. Let me see if I have this correct now. Correct me if I'm wrong. Somebody has
That'll be okay.
Somebody has good intentions, and because they have good intentions, this will necessarily result in good works. Because I claim the ACS is going to make earning a private pilot certificate far more difficult for somebody in terms of cost and accessibility, and you cannot answer my main question.
Well,
Let me ask my main question.
I have. You just don't buy the answer. I tell you it's taken 20 to 30 minutes longer.
Give me the proof that you have that asking risk management questions on the ACS, on the private pilot exam, on the ACS, will increase safety, and my concern is it's going to increase cost with no effect on behavior. Give me the proof. What is your proof?
So there are many things that we do in life every day. For instance, looking both ways before crossing the street, teaching our children to look both ways before crossing the street.
Good behavior.
That doesn't require a scientific study with proof before we do that. If someone told me, John, you have no proof that looking both ways before you cross the street increases safety, I'm still going to tell my children to look both ways before they cross the street, because some things are so obvious. If people become aware of the risks, and they think a little bit and they become aware of the risks associated with being goal-oriented, if they become aware of the risks associated with being fatigued, if they learn about those and they think about them when they wouldn't have thought about them otherwise, we're going to get a better outcome. Now, if you really want to stop a project, you require scientific proof. But the point is, there's no scientific proof for many of the things that we know that make common sense.
What about if I have scientific proof that actually shows asking risk assessment questions and teaching situational awareness at the primary level? And this is what I want to make sure you understand, at the primary level. I don't care about the, well, I care, but it's not the advanced level I'm really concerned about. It's the primary level, because that's where we keep people from having accessibility to. So
you're saying
it's
you
at
can
the primary level.
proof.
It doesn't. I can supply proof that the effect of risk management and higher order thinking, which is what risk management is, at the primary level, does not have the effect that you claim it does.
Well,
would you like the proof?
get that to the Airman Certification Standards Working Group, because we're meeting in December. It would be nice to have this information, and
My
we can
information's
improve
been out since 2013.
So where is that data?
It's on my website since 2013 when I first responded
Well, maybe
to
you could send it to me in an email, because
maybe the website, if you have a computer at home, you can go ahead and access my website.
So John, Rod is asking.
I say that with kindness, my friend.
I can see that.
I know you have a computer.
I can see that.
Rod is asserting that skills are more important than risk management at the primary level. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the question I have for you is, does the ACS change anything with the skill training?
No, we didn't change the skills at all. We still have the same skills, and let me make it clear. A pilot has to have skills. There's no question about it. They're terribly, terribly important. However, no matter how good a pilot's skills, if they fail to manage the risks, they're going to get themselves beyond their own capability and beyond the airplane's capability. And it happens to very, very skilled pilots all the time. Every pilot, no matter how good their skills, has a limit. And it's important for pilots to understand what their limits are and to live within the limits of themselves and their aircraft. And what we're talking about here is helping pilots do that. We have always required risk assessment on a check ride, but it's been a special emphasis item, and what we're doing is simplifying and improving the way we're expressing the need to be able to identify and mitigate risks.
Right, and let me give you an example of what, first of all, simplifying is. The folks on the ACS committee, this is very bizarre logic, said we have to change the PTS because There are 16 special interest items that had been added to the PTS over its 30 years of development. PTS was a marvelous document. It was simple, easy to use, and it was practical. It had the word practical in it. So what happened was, somebody said, I'm not sure who does your math on the ACS committee, but it might not be you. You know, you're a sharp guy, but
no, I'm not good at math.
Somebody, 5 out of 4 people aren't, as a matter of fact. So don't worry about that. It's a delay reaction on this one. But here's the deal. Take some time. I can wait on this one here. 16 special interest items. Somebody said, oh my gosh, oh, the PTS is bloated. We got to do something. Fine. Here's what they did. They got rid of the 16 special interest items. Talk about complexifying something. Absorbed them into the PCS, thus becoming the ACS, and then added, wait for it, 363 risk management questions to the ACS, of which flight instructors, DPEs, and applicants are required to have knowledge of all those 363 risk management questions. They have to answer 46 risk management questions, among other things, on the oral exam. And here's my, well,
actually, that's not true, and give me a chance.
No, it is true. Why is it not true? Tell me.
Well, it's because they can create scenarios. They can combine things.
Right. Scenarios and combining.
And as a result, we're asking a pilot to demonstrate the habit of identifying and mitigating risks. We're using these, and they can put them in scenarios, and as long as the scenarios cover the whole general situation, they don't have to ask, 64 separate questions? They don't have to do that at all.
What you want people to do, but what people actually do now, John, is actually much different, because the oral exam is taking 4 hours, 5 hours, 4.5 hours over here.
Some examiner needs some help if that's the case.
No, that's not the case. And the reason I say that, again, with all due respect, the older examiners that are doing this, they're going to do the things the way they've always done them. The newer examiners and the examiners that are being tested are going to do it the way the ACS actually says. And the ACS says you have to do this and this and this, just like I said.
No, it doesn't.
It does, and I disagree because the empirical evidence says the opposite. But my point there is this, that here's the real beef about the risk management questions that I have, and this really boils down to it in terms of making the exam easier, making the exam more complicated. The practical test standards was an amazing document because, as I say, it was practical. It was the most objective document for assessing somebody's skills, as objective as it can get. The risk management questions, if you look in the FAA's risk management handbook, it says this: risk management, as John teaches it and as the FAA teaches it, because it's the same way, is not an authentic, full-bodied risk management philosophy. What it does is it only measures hazards. In other words, identifying hazards rather than actually identifying, managing, assessing risk. Those questions are highly, highly subjective. Every single one. The FAA says that by definition, risk management is a subjective thing peculiar to an individual. So now we've taken an objective private pilot exam and have turned it into, in essence, what has become a highly subjective exam based on the whim of the examiner, the feeling of the examiner, because we've lost our objectivity from the PCS. That is my biggest beef with the, essentially with the PTS, other than making a private license harder to acquire because of extra time.
Okay. Moving on to the economy. No, wait. No, so, John, I wanted you to address something. There's been a little bit of a controversy. Doug Stewart with SAFE,
yes.
He came out and said, well, wait a minute. He was on the ACS working group, and they specifically agreed that the definition of slow flight would not change. And now the definition of slow flight has changed in the new ACS and the way that instructors are supposed to teach fly at slow flight and do not allow the stall warning horn to activate. Can you explain what happened there?
It is a very interesting issue. The question is, should we teach pilots, new pilots, to fly along with the stall warning horn on?
For slow flight.
For slow flight. We're teaching them to be able to maneuver the airplane in slow flight. And if we have them fly in a prolonged time with the stall warning horn on, are we teaching them a bad habit of ignoring the stall warning horn? And there's a group of people who feels you should never, ever have a person ignore the stall warning horn. So the slow flight has to be conducted at a speed with the stall warning horn off. The other group says, no, we want them to know what it feels like in the area or the region of reverse command on the backside of the power required curve. So we want people to know how sinky an airplane is when you're very near the stall, and that's one of your warnings you're about to stall. It's a good issue, and it had been brought up, and frankly, this change that says we now are going to have them fly with the stall warning horn off instead of on during slow flight just caught me by surprise, caught a lot of other people by surprise. And they were changing it in the handbooks. And when we met this last time in the working group, we went back and discussed how we got there and why did it catch me by surprise. And the reason it caught me by surprise is I was getting the things I wanted and I wasn't paying attention. And we're covering a lot of things in these meetings, and they wanted to change that. Somebody higher order in the FAA wanted to change it so that people would never fly with the stall warning horn on because they think it's bad to train pilots to fly over prolonged periods with the stall warning horn on. That came up and became a big issue at the last working group meeting we were at in Washington, D.C. And so they decided we're going to bring it again, we're going to review it again, and they sent all 50 of us on the working group questions to answer and to give our opinion and a very full dialogue on it, for a full dialogue on it. And this whole process, by the way, has been people with universities, independent flight instructors, people with flight schools, people who are in flight training business in all sorts of different ways. We've had over 50 people of it. We've been working on it. We've been working over to 5 years. It's the best, most adult collaboration that I've seen in my lifetime. It's all the skills that we learn in kindergarten were employed there. And we teach each other, we treat each other with civility and respect and do a good job doing this. And these are people very, very, very qualified to do this. And so it's not a bunch of bureaucrats doing it. They're people who are hands-on, have been teaching flying for decades. So we're going to review this business on the slow flight thing, and we're all going to type up how we feel about it, and we're meeting in December again in Washington, and it'll come back, and we may get a different result out of it. I'm not sure that I know the answer to the question. My inclination is to think that people ought to know how to fly in the region of reverse command and be able to tell that they're there just by the feel of the aircraft. On the other hand, I also think it's a bad idea to fly around and ignore the stall warning horn. So I don't know how I want it to come out. I don't know how it will come out, but I can tell you this. As with everything else we've done in this working group, it's been approached at a very, very high level with a great deal of collaboration and with a great deal of civility and respect. And it's been the most noble thing I have seen the FAA ever do. Many times I have not been a fan of the FAA. But in this case, they have been very, very noble about it, very high level about it, and as I say, we're at least employing the things we learned in kindergarten. So we'll see how this comes out. I don't know the answer to it. I don't know how I want it to come out, and we're covering a lot of things in these meetings, and we've worked through a lot of detail, and so frankly, some of us weren't paying attention, and I think that was probably the case with Doug. Certainly was the case with me.
Rod, what did you think of when you saw that?
It sounds like a big love fest over there at the ACS committee. That's what it sounds like.
Is that okay, Rod? Is that all right? Is that okay?
I'm just picking on you, John. You know,
I can see that.
You knew I was going to pick on you a little bit. You're welcome to do it to me, as you have been, I might add. But let's see, very high level, collaborative, kindergarten type of feeling, especially kindergarten logic, because folks, let me just say this. Here's what all that has produced. It has produced the dumbing down of another pilot skill. And that is, now the ACS doesn't require a pilot to fly in the backside of the power curve. You'll have to excuse me for being color me a skeptic, but let me nail my colors to the mast here. That is a bad thing. And you'll say, caught you by surprise. Well, before you do that, I just happen to have, You always want to do your research and never bring a knife to a gunfight. That is a letter from David Ord. You've probably seen that.
I have seen that.
You have, then I'll take it
And
back.
I am barely literate, so I did read it.
And that says that all the ACS committee members knew beforehand that the change in slow flight was going to take place. And apparently, not enough of you did something about that. So, I mean, that's what it says. That's Susan Parsons.
No,
and
it's true. It's true.
It's
They
true. Now, listen,
documented
you were
that.
honest enough to say it caught you by surprise. I get that.
No, I just wasn't paying attention.
Well, listen, I do that too, but I understand how that works.
It's a personal problem.
Okay, we seem to have the same affliction at times then, but the fact is that look at what the results are. The results is this dumbing down of aviation. We get rid of the NDB questions on the exam. We make airplanes, we allow them to fly now without being an applicant testing at the flight at minimum controllable airspeed. You cannot be in the region of reverse command unless you fly with a stall horn on in most airplanes. That is an aerodynamic fact. So consequently, we no longer have pilots that are developing the stick and rudder skills, but they're no longer answering difficult ADF test questions, and they're no longer having to really parse the numbers when they answer a performance question, but they are learning how to think in terms of higher order thinking skills at the sacrifice of their basic flying skills, and that's proof of that.
Let me make
That's
some
what I think
comments.
about.
One, this would have happened whether or not we'd done the ACS, because this came from higher level in the FAA. And the fact that we do have the ACS means we have the opportunity to reverse it. So the fact that we have the ACS and the ACS working group means that we can reverse it. Second, you keep harping on higher order thinking skills. It's not mentioned anywhere. I don't know where you're getting that. So it's a nice job of building up an argument that we're not making.
Do you not understand that risk management is a higher order thinking skill?
No, I don't think it is.
Yeah, okay, well then you'd have to actually talk to the folks your friend Robert, who created FITS, because that was his definition for higher order thinking skills: risk management, situational awareness, and his favorite.
Who's this?
Robert Wright, your friend.
Bob Wright?
Bob Wright.
Okay, yeah.
So
I've heard of Robert Wright, yeah.
He's a nice man.
Am I responsible for everything he said?
No, but you're responsible for not understanding what he said when it comes to risk management.
Oh, he's good. He's good. He's very good.
No, and again, I mean that with no disrespect to my friend here, but but here's my point. I think my point is that risk management is a higher order thinking skill, and so
no, it's a habit. And
it can be both, John. It can be a habit, and I think that doesn't exclude one from the other, I think.
Oh, okay. So, but the point is, you're building up a case against high order thinking skills, and so if it can also be defined as instead of a habit as a high order thinking skills, it's a bad thing. Is that correct?
How many people have ever taken differential calculus before they took algebra? Anybody here ever take differential calculus? Yes. If you try to get a person to think like a professional pilot, a pilot with higher order thinking skills in this instance, before you teach them to fly, it will have no effect whatsoever. And so consequently, no positive effect. You asked for the proof that risk management at the primary level doesn't work. The proof is in FITS, FAA Industry Training Standards, that had as its main theme risk management, situational awareness, and scenario-based training.
It's another straw man.
No, it's actual fact. I mean, you can't deny.
Yes, it's a straw man, though.
Yep, and I can.
Do you understand what a straw man is?
I
I'll use
understand.
your technique
and
on me.
here's my point. 10 years, every time I go to prove it to you, you try to distract me here, but 10 years worth of application of risk management, situational awareness, scenario-based training in general aviation, no effect on the aviation safety level at the primary level, and that's
You're
what I'm
actually
talking about.
arguing against situational awareness?
No, I'm arguing that people should be taught to fly first before they're taught to think like airline pilots. That's what I'm arguing.
Well, I would like to think that anyone who carries someone I care about in an aircraft knows how to manage risks.
Yeah, John, I would suspect that anybody that is trained properly as a private pilot, trained well, then for that level of experience they're acquiring, they're learning how to manage risks at the level of experience they're acquiring. How many people in here learn to manage a crosswind landing? How many people learn to manage you can do it very well. How many people learn to manage the risks associated with a crosswind landing, concomitant with learning the skills of landing in a crosswind landing. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the idea.
And that's what primary training teaching does. They don't add 363 new risk management requirements, highly subjective questions to the ACS to draw
So you
out
don't want them
the
to document it. You want them to do it, but not be ever provide no guidance. Is that correct?
I don't want anything to interfere with primary students in the development of their training.
So I guess reading would interfere with that.
Yeah, no, see, that's a straw man. That would be a straw man. The point is that the ACS, as you said, will lengthen training times, and that's what the ACS will do.
We've got data that says it's increasing it by about,
Of course.
practical test by 20 to 30 minutes, and it is.
Yeah, no,
and
20 to 30
I don't
minutes.
think that's completely desirable, and I'm not in favor of making things more complicated.
Yeah,
but
and
it is 20.
I know you
Let's
want.
use the real facts. The 20, 30 minutes, not 5 hours on the average.
Well, then you'll have to talk to Mark back there, and then Diego Garcia, and all the folks that have written to me on my website. And I don't really have the access you have for this, but the people that comment to me how long things are taking on their check rides now, and the concomitant increase in cost for those things.
At the
That's what I'm
last
against.
meeting of the examiners in San Diego FISDO, they told us 20 to 30 minutes.
I think a question that's probably on the minds of a lot of the pilots here in this room is, how does the ACS affect me? Does this mean the next time I go and do a flight review, suddenly the flight instructor will be having me do slow flight and not expecting the stall warning horn to come on? Or will anything else change, and what do I do about that?
I think that you will find the dialogue that we have in the aviation community, the vocabulary we have will improve, and we'll get more thoughtful about it over time. I don't think it has to be complicated. I don't think it has to be as complex as Rod. I just think we're going to get more insightful. We're going to get more thoughtful. We're going to be able to understand that one of the risk factors involved in flying is the goal-oriented behavior of a pilot. And so I think we're going to wind up having fewer accidents and more people who survive. And it doesn't have to be all that difficult unless we make it so.
And part of the ACS is to track all of that data to make sure that, you know, as Rod said, you've shown 20 to 30 minutes, but it's early days, so you're going to continue to track that, obviously.
We're going to
be tracking
to learn.
the safety record.
But my point is, if all the examiners in the San Diego FISDO tell us it's 20 to 30 minutes, let's live with the reality. Let's deal with things as they really are. Not as some anecdotal case does.
And as far as anecdotal case, as I said, an examiner of this experience is going to continue to do what he or she is doing right now. Examiners are reluctant to change. They're not going to change much about what they're doing. It's what happens 6 months to a year from now when the FAA checks out a new examiner, a new DPE. And the FAA says, listen, you've got to follow the ACS. This is what it is right here. And yes, you can combine and connect and what have you, and that's all fine. But still, you've added 363 risk management questions. And by the way, you've also added over 400 knowledge questions to the PTS. So that's 700, and not, you know, they don't have to do all of those questions and all the risk management questions, but they have to be responsible for all of them. Highly subjective questions. The point is, newer examiners are going to end up taking a lot longer. So what happens now is fine. It's not what happens now. I'm worried about 6 months down the year.
The alternative is you withdraw those and let examiners make up their own questions, which they've been doing all along. So all we're doing is documenting the issues.
The alternative is you do exactly what the PTS did, the fine document. It was the examiner used his own or her own common sense and experience.
Wait a minute, you're just arguing against being subjective.
No, listen, that's what the PTS in essence did. It allowed the examiner to use his or her own experience. That doesn't imply subjectivity. By the way, that doesn't mean there was no subjectivity on the PTS, but it was minimalist, as minimal as it can be, which made the PTS a fine document. And so the examiner examined risk. Just looking at the applicant, would attest the applicant, would get a feel for the person to the degree that the examiner felt comfortable signing that person's name to that person's certificate and making sure the examiner tested the flying skills of the individual. So the point is, now the examiner has to participate in specific highly subjective risk management questions, and that is an entirely different animal, John.
The purpose of this risk management is to change from subjective to objective. That's the reason we're writing it down. And the other thing is how do you grade a soft field landing without being subjective?
As I said, there's always a certain amount of subjectivity in any test. The real issue, though, is it's minimized. The PTS did the best job of making it as objective a test as possible.
By being silent on a whole bunch of things.
The ACS was a step completely backwards away from that, increasing the subjectivity
No,
of
the
test.
ACS was a step towards documenting things so that people had
Documenting
expectations.
subjectivity in this instance. I don't think you get away from that, my friend.
What do you think, folks? I think they're going to agree to disagree. That's all the time we have for the debate. Thank you very much, Rod. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming.
You're a good guy.
Yeah, John's a good man.